Right then, let's let's go ahead and get started. Again tonight, our lesson comes from Job chapter 12. If you remember last week, Zophar is speaking. Thus far, Zophar is the third one of Job's friends to speak. Eliphaz spoke first. Eliphaz was the more educated, the more eloquent one, and he came to Job in a very friendly tone, but yet very aggressive, believing in the thought that Job had done something, even though there was no physical evidence that Job had done anything wrong before God, because Job was suffering. The conclusion was he had sinned. It was a secret sin. It was not open to the eyes of everybody, but it was to them a secret sin that God only saw in his wisdom and knowledge. And so Eliphaz comes in that very eloquent manner, first praising Job and then putting it out there. Job, you know yourself because you have done this before. You have said this to other people. Sin causes suffering, and because you are suffering, you must have sinned. And then Bildad comes along and he says the same thing. He backs it up and he says, Job, he said, you're nothing but a big bag of wind. You're denying that you've done anything, and you're trying to act like you're so innocent, but all you are is a big bag of wind. And then last week, Zophar came forward and he says, can a man be born a jackass? In other words, what he was saying, Job, you're a jackass. You're a bag of wind, you're a jackass, because you know, wisdom tells you, knowledge tells you that something has gone wrong in your life. You have some secret sin, even though we cannot identify that sin, you must know what it is. And if you will repent of it, God will take care of you. God will give you all of these good things. Your name will come back. Your wealth will come back. People will speak well of you. All of those things. And so what does Job do? Chapter 12, chapter 13, chapter 14, Job begins to answer. And some of the passages of Scripture that we use so often and so much can be found in these chapters. One of the things that we'll see next week, Job will make the statement, though he slay me, still I will trust him. It will speak about his faith that is continued in God. While he does not understand, he cannot explain, he is searching God's wisdom in the fact of what's going on in his life. He still has that deep, abiding trust in God, that God knows what he's doing. God has a reason for doing it. But here in chapter 12, he's talking about wisdom and discerning it, because that's what it is. You know, the wisdom that he talks about comes from God. And Zophar has made a statement about wisdom. So Job, if you look in verse 1, the Bible says, Job replies. In other words, he is going to speak to them as to what they have been accusing him of. And again, let me remind you that a lot of the book of Job is dialogue, conversations between one to the other. And so it's back and forward. And that's the reason that we're going through these chapters like this, because, again, while it's theological in perspective, it is also emotional, and it's that human experience in that journey of faith that we go through. And Job is experiencing the highs and the lows in this journey of faith, okay? So in chapter 12, he says, doubtless you are the people. Now, I want you to look at that verse right there, and it's that finger pointing at you. You ever done that? You. Well, basically, that's what you are the people. And I'll explain what that means in just a minute. He says, doubtless you are the people, and wisdom will die with you. but I have a mind as well as you. I am not inferior to you. Who does not know all these things, which they had been talking about? He said, I have become a laughing stock to my friends, though I called upon God, and he answered. Now, here's the way that Job is talking about that he answered through his suffering. Job is saying, I haven't heard from God. I've asked, but it is being answered through my experiences. Though I called upon God and he answered, a mere laughingstock. Though righteous and blameless, men at ease have contempt for me, for my misfortune, as the fate of those whose feet are slipping. The tents of marauders or the tents of thieves are undisturbed, and those who provoke God are secure. Those who carry God, their God, in their hands, but ask the animals, and they will teach you, of the birds of the air, and they will tell you, or speak to the earth, and it will teach you, or let the fish of the sea inform you, which all of these does not know. And the hand of the Lord has done this. In his hand is the life of every creature, and the breath of all mankind. Does not the ear test words, as the tongue tastes food? Is not wisdom found among the aged? Does not long life bring understanding? To God, and again, here it's changing tone. Now he's starting to talk about God. To God belongs wisdom and power. Counsel and understanding are his. What he tears down cannot be rebuilt. The man he imprisons cannot be released. If he holds back the waters, there is drought. And if he lets them loose, they devastate the land. To him belong strength and victory. Both deceived and deceiver are his. He leads counselors away stripped and makes fools of judges. He takes off the shackles put on by kings and ties a loincloth around their waist. He leads priests away stripped and overthrows men long established. He silences the lip of trusted advisors and takes away the discernment of elders. He pours content on nobles and disarms the mighty. He reveals the deep things of darkness and brings deep shadows into the light. He makes nations great and destroys them. He enlarges nations and disperses them. He deprives the leaders of the earth of their reason. He sends them wandering through a trackless waste. They grope in darkness with no light. He makes them stagger like drunkards. Again, as we're looking at this, we understand that in the first part, Job is speaking to those that have brought accusations and assumptions against him that he is guilty of some sin. No matter what the sin is, it is a sin serious enough that God brings judgment upon him. And as he has been humiliated and talked down to, he is responding to them in the sense that even you and I would respond if somebody was talking down to you. I don't mind being talked to. I can even live with being talked about. But when I'm dealing with somebody and they're talking down to me, I am insulted. And most of the time, that's when my temper arises, and you're going to get a good response from me most of the time. That's what's happening here. Job is giving a response out of all the things that they have said to him. Job, you have sinned. Job, you're a bag of wind. Job, you're a jackass. You're a liar. You are a blasphemer. And you have tread upon the holiness of God. I think Job's had enough. You know, some people will tell you, it's up to here and I'm about done. And that's what Job is saying in this passage of Scripture. Now, if you look in verses 1 through 4, you'll see Job's claim of equality with his friends about spiritual things. He said, and he's very sarcastic here. In the sarcasm here, he uses that word you. And you know, again, when people say you know without a doubt who is talking and who they're talking to whom. And so Job is talking to them, and he's talking, and he very sarcastically says, well, you've been talking to me, you've been talking about me, and now you are talking down to me. Apparently, you're the kind of people that's up here and I'm down here. And apparently, wisdom's going to die with you. You are a know-it-all. I kid my wife all the time. My wife tells me I'm the most intelligent person in the world. And I say, why? She said, because you're a know-it-all, you know. I think that's about the way that Job is saying to them. He said, you've been talking to me, about me, and talking down to me. I guess you know it all because all of these assumptions and all of these accusations that you have made, I'm about tired of it, and I want you to know I know the things that you know, and I am not inferior to you. Again, when we think about those personal pronouns and Job responding, Job says, apparently wisdom's going to die with you. In other words, you know it all, and when you're gone, nobody's going to know nothing. Can you hear the sarcasm there? Can you hear the little darts of his tongue speaking to them? He's not being kind because they haven't been kind to him. They have attacked him viciously and consistently. They haven't let up on him. And I think that he's just about fed up with it. And in verses 1 through 4, Job says three things, and then he comes to a conclusion. Those three things, first of all, he said, I have a brain like you. That's what he says. I have a brain like you. I am not inferior to you. Who does not know all these things? In other words, what you're saying is common knowledge. And here's what we realize is that what they were saying was right. Sin does cause suffering, no matter what. But does suffering ever come when somebody has not sinned? And Job has already said, none of us can stand before God and say, I've never sinned. Job would say, I don't have a leg to stand on, just like you, because all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. But Job says, I have a brain like you. I have attained this same knowledge that you have, because Eliphaz in the beginning says, Job, you have said the same things that we are saying to you. Now, again, we look at it. These are supposed to be wise men. These are supposed to be men that are leaders in the community and, as you might say, leaders in the church. But here they have come and they have viciously come against Job. He said, I have a brain like you. I know as much as you do. I know about the things that you're talking about. I have learned these things. I have lived these things. And so thus, I know what you're talking about. And anyone, he says, can see the things that you're saying. It doesn't take an expert to see these things, is what he's saying in verses 1 through 4. I have become a laughingstock to my friends, is what it concludes. I called upon God, and he answered. Now again, Job is putting himself in the position of prayer, okay? Have you ever went to God and you asked God to give you clarity about something, to give you understanding about something? He said, you have to realize that the Bible said Job was a righteous man. He was a praying man. He was a generous man. He was a family man. He was a man of spiritual qualities. And he said, I've talked to God many times about the things that you're talking, and now God has answered in this way. Sometimes we think about God answering our prayers, but not in the way that we ask Him to do. Well, Job is saying, I don't know why God has responded to me in the way that He has. I don't know why He has made me a laughing stock to my friends. Even though I called and He answered, a mere laughing stock. Though I'm righteous, though I'm blameless, He has answered in this way. Isn't it? Sometimes the things of life are hard to understand. There are no explanations for it. There are no definite answers. And again, I remind you that people come to me all the time wanting an answer to something that's going on in their life. And I have to be honest with them. I can't tell you why. I cannot tell you why. And I don't know what the outcome is going to be. All I can say to you is trust God. Trust God. Because, folks, that's where the answer lies each and every time. And I think that's what the journey of faith is. It's trusting God, okay? I am mocked by my friends, even though I plead my case to God as one who is righteous, one who is innocent. And he says, I don't know what to say to you about my suffering. I don't have an answer to give you. And I put in the parentheses there, walking a mile in somebody else's shoe. That's an old phrase that all of us have used.
His friends didn't have no compassion at all for him. They were just judging him and kind of angry with him, saying, oh, you had to have sinned.
They were coming at him like a pack of vicious dogs in their own self-righteousness, okay? And again, you get a self-righteous person who thinks that they're right, they'll die in that self-righteousness before they'll ever give it up. I mean, it's like a dog on a bone, and that's the way that they're coming at Job, okay? But Job explains to them very sarcastically, listen, you don't know any more than I know, and I know as much as you know, because I have seen it, I have experienced it, but I can't give you an answer as to why I am going through this, because right now to me and to you, it is an unanswerable question, because God hasn't chose to reveal to me the whys and the wherefores. Okay? The second thing is Job cautions his friends about their spiritual superiority. Now, let me tell you, a person who is self-righteous, I mean, they have elevated themselves to a position that you would think that they were so close to Jesus that they look like Jesus himself. A know-it-all. Have any of you seen the news lately that there's a person in Russia that says that he's the reincarnation of Jesus? Yeah, again, there are a lot of people in churches that won't say that, but they assume that, okay? That they're God's mouthpiece. They're the ones that can make the determinations and the decisions, and they can define who is good and who is bad and all of that. Folks, let me tell you something. The Bible teaches us that all of our righteousness is as filthy rags. Which one of us has the right to judge the other? Because we're all sinners saved by grace. We're searching the course of God's will and God's pathway for our life. And so this is what Job is saying. He cautions his friends in verses 4 through 7. He said, I have become a laughingstock to my friends. Though I called upon God, he answered. A mere laughingstock, though righteous and blameless. Men at ease have contempt for misfortune, as the fate of those whose feet are slipping. The tents of marauders are undisturbed, and those who provoke God are secure, those who carry their God in their own hands. Okay? But ask the animals, and they will teach you, or the birds of the air, and they will tell you. In other words, or speak to the earth, and they will teach you. Let the fish of the sea teach you. You see, what he's talking about here is it's easy to judge somebody else when you're not going through it. Now, again, we're here in North Carolina, right? I'm going to give this illustration. We're here in North Carolina. We're in our houses, and we're comfortable. But down in Louisiana, down in Mississippi, down in Alabama, down in the Caribbean, there are people that are homeless right now. There are people that's looking for the bare essentials and everything else. And this is what Job is saying. He said, you know, what did they do to deserve it? What did they do to deserve it? That's the question a lot of times that we have to ask ourselves when a person is going through a severe time of trial and tribulation. Do they really deserve this? And Job is going to tell us in just a few minutes that it's just the pathway of nature. It's the pathway of life. These things come, these things that go. People get sick, they die. People go through storms, they lose everything that they've got. That is just something that we have to realize. It is a part of what life is all about. God didn't promise us a bed of roses. He did not promise us we're going to be wealthy, healthy, and when He comes back again, we're going to take it all to heaven with us. He didn't do that. And that's what Job is trying to share to them. He describes them as men of ease. My grandmother used to say this, and I know that your grandmothers probably said this to you, or your mothers or dads or whatever. Idle minds and idle hands are nothing more than tools of the devil. Again, it's like being an armchair quarterback on Sunday. I'm not on that field, I'm not the coach, I'm not the player, but boy, I'm critical of every mistake that they make. You see? That's what the position, and that's what Job describes them being. You're people at ease. You're not going through this, so it's easy for you to be critical of me because you're not going through the things that I'm going through. You're not feeling the pain that I'm feeling. You're not experiencing the suffering and the tears that I'm feeling. You don't understand these things because you're men at ease. But he said, watch out. You're on a slippery slope. You know what a slippery slope is, don't you? It's trying to go up a hill that's wet, that don't want you to go up it. Several years ago, and it was funny in a way, but yet it wasn't nice either, some deacons of mine and I went to a West Virginia football game up in Morgantown. And it had been raining cats and dogs, but yet they were going to play. In Morgantown, West Virginia, when there is a football game going on, the stadium is full. It is larger than any town or city in West Virginia. There are more people there than any town. But my deacons and I, we were walking and we were trying to get into the stadium, and there was a hill there, and you had to walk around it to get into the stadium. But some partiers, and a lady in particular, decided they wanted to take a shortcut. Now, some of her friends, they made it up okay. But she climbed up, and she had been drinking a little bit, I think. And she climbed up, and she slid down. She got up, she climbed up, and she slid down. Multiple times she tried it. And again, it was sort of hilarious to watch her do it. And so it gathered a crowd there. Everybody was wondering, is this woman going to make it? Because she wasn't going to give up. And so finally she got up, she pulled her pants down, and she mooned everybody. So again, that's what you call a slippery slope. What Job is saying here, he said, you better be cautious because you're on a slippery slope. You're men at ease because you're not going through this, but you're one breath away. You're one day away. You're 1 year away of to going through the same things. Folks, let me tell you something. What somebody else is going through today, we can go through tomorrow. And that's what Job is saying. Life is like a slippery slope. We think that we're on a firm foundation. And we asked ourselves the question, why does God let some get away with things? And he gives the reference here about those who carry their God in their hand. In other words, their God is their life. It's about them. They have no concerns outside themselves. But he describes them as living in a house of robbers, marauders, thieves. Okay, have you seen the commercial on TV that is talking about these security systems, and the guy's got a mask on, he's got a big red beard, mustache, and everything, and he's talking about how to secure your place from people like him. He said, I've got a security system, okay? It seems like that those who are secure in themselves, they think that even though they take from others, they are preserved from people coming and taking from them. And Job says, listen, you're just 1 day away. One day it's going to happen to you. And he says, do you think God does not notice? And look what he said in verse 6. The tents of marauders are undisturbed, and those who provoke God are secure, because they carry their God in their hands. And the question is that we ask many times is, why does God let good people go through bad things and bad people don't ever seem to get hurt with bad things? They've got the good things of life. Well, Job says, listen, they're just 1 day away from the judgment of God, and we have to be about that. Now, Job goes to the next thing in verses 8 through 12, and he talks about learning from God, and he talks about life. And he goes through there, and he said, listen, the wisdom of God in why God does something and the way that God does something, listen, it's a part of nature. It's a part of life. And he said we can learn from it. And he uses the examples of animals and fish. He uses the examples of the earth itself. Why do catastrophes happen? Animals and the fish, they have to go through the elements of nature, the storms of life, just like anybody else. Does not the things of nature teach you that we can understand the wisdom of God? We can't understand the ways of God. Folks, we don't know the why-fors that God is allowing anything to happen. Anybody that seems to think so, listen, they've got a lesson to be learned, and they will be the first ones to fall when catastrophe comes their way. Job says, I can't tell you an answer. I can't give you an explanation. He said, but nature teaches us that things happen. Your own senses. He said, your ears are able to determine the words of somebody else. The elders, he said, your tongue is able to tell you whether a food is good or food is bad. You ever drank spoiled milk? You spit it out pretty quickly, don't you? Because nature has given you the ability to tell if something is good or bad to you. And that's what Job is saying. God speaks through the ways of nature, and we need to learn from them. But he says also the elders, the older folks, they have learned that life is hard. They have learned that life is not always fair. And I'll tell you that without a shadow of a doubt. Life is not fair. If life was fair, then the sun would shine every day, the grass would always be green, food would always be on the table, there would be no sickness, no death. We call that heaven. Okay? So that's what he's saying. Now, this is Job's answer to his friends. Now, Job begins to change the tone. The first tone is sarcastic toward his friends. The second tone is sacred because it comes out in the form of doxology. You say, well, what is the doxology? Praise God from whom all blessings flow. That's a doxology. It is doxa, praise. In other words, giving praise to God. Job, in all of his suffering, and all of his trials, all of his tribulation, and all of his being upset with his friends, because next week you're going to find he is going to say, you are worthless doctors to me. Okay? And that's what we're going to be looking at next week. You are worthless to me. But he begins a doxology on the wisdom of God. Job is expressing that he does not understand everything about God, but one thing that he does understand about God is that he's got the whole world in his hands. The whole world. Now listen, nothing goes on without God's permission. That's why Job was going through the trial and tribulation, because the devil had permission of God to allow him to suffer these things. Nothing happens without God knowing. Nothing slips up on God, folks. That's what you need to understand. He knows why we have to have hurricanes. He knows why that there are earthquakes. And Job goes through doxology about this. His focus is on God, and his focus is on the ownership and the power of God's wisdom. Look at verse 13. What does it say? To God belongs wisdom and power, counsel and understanding are his. Okay? So that's a doxa. That's praise. And so he is praising God. And what he's talking about in verse 13, that counsel and understanding is his. God knows why he's doing something. There is a reason behind it. God does nothing without reason. And God has purpose in everything. That's why Paul was saying in Romans, all things work to the good for them that love the Lord and called according to his purpose. We have to understand that God has purpose in everything. Counsel and understanding are his. But God's wisdom and actions have power, because in verse 16, notice what he said, to him belongs strength and victory. In other words, God's going to have the last say. He is going to have the last word, victory, okay? And so it's demonstrated in a lot of ways. And down through verses 13 through 24, there are about 14 things that Job points out to us in these verses. I'm not going to read every one to you, but he says to us, the things that he tears apart cannot be rebuilt. The things that capture a man, he cannot be released. If he holds back water with a drought, everything will dry up. If he sends water, it will flood the earth. Wisdom and power belong to him. All must give answer to him. He is wiser than the wise, and he can make the wise look like fools. Paul will say in 1 Corinthians, even the wisdom of men are less than the foolishness of God. That's what he'll say in 1 Corinthians. In other words, listen, we think we know it all, we can do it all. Well, listen, we fall short of it, okay? He says, those who think that they have power, he makes them lowly. Those who are religious leaders, they can be ripped of their office and their robes. He takes away the ability to speak and the wisdom that is gathered over the years. He puts shame to those that have positioned themselves in a place of power, and then he will replace them with somebody else. He exposes the darkest corners of everybody's life. That's one of the things that is hard for us to understand, and that there's nothing about each one of us that God does not know. There's nothing that we can do that God does not see. God has his eyes upon us, not in the sense that he wants to destroy us, but he cares for us. But you see, when we look at it, and Job is talking about nations, he talks about replacing people. How is it that we study history? This king rose to power, and suddenly it was taken away from him. This king rose to power, and it was taken away from him. That's life. I heard the other day this preacher talking, and he said, right now I'm afraid for America because I don't know that we are going to have a place to stand with God in the event of history of things of what's going on. And I can understand that because, folks, listen, we have a young generation that does not believe in democracy. They believe in socialism. You know, that somebody ought to have power over us, taking care of us. Where democracy says, I can take care of myself. I've got the freedom to do it. But yet, you see, nations rise, they fall. Kings come, they go. Princes rise, they go. Priests come, they get replaced. I had a lady told me one time, she said, "Preacher, you just visiting here." She said, "We have preachers that come and go, and we can tell you to go anytime we want to." I said, "Okay." Yeah. She was real nice, wasn't she?
Some big mouths around.
I was told that. Preachers come and they go. We stay. Well, she's wrong. He takes away the light, and there's nothing but darkness. But he talks about the wisdom of men versus the wisdom of God. We think that we're wise and that we can explain everything. We know everything, just like Job's friends are accusing him and assuming that he has committed some deadly sin that has brought the suffering upon. But notice what Job characterizes them as being. He says he sends them wandering through a trackless waste. In other words, they don't know where they're going. There's no path for them to follow. And listen to this. He makes them stagger like a drunk man in the dark. Now, again, we understand that a person who is totally drunk with alcohol, they stagger. But have you ever seen one try to walk in the dark of the night when they cannot see the ground beneath them? They don't know where the holes are. They don't know where the rises are. They don't know where the slopes are. And folks, they go staggering and falling. A man who thinks he is anybody, man who thinks that he knows everything, he's going to meet God one day, and God's going to show him how little he really knows. Okay? So basically, Job answers. He answers with dialogue to his friends, and he answers with doxology to God. God's in charge. And that's what faith is, folks. No matter what we're going through in life, we have to understand, we have to accept, we have to believe that God is still in charge no matter what. Okay? Questions or comments? Miss Carol, what'd you say? Okay. Yeah, it's two hard heads meeting together, right? You're right. He does have those contrasts. That's what life's all about. We have good days, bad days. We have days of sunshine, days of darkness. Again, that's what life's all about. There are no guarantees except you're going to die one day, and you're going to struggle through things before you get there. Anybody else?
Is acceptance faith?
Explain what you mean by acceptance.
Bingo. That's what I'm trying to figure out. I have a hard time accepting certain things, and I'm just wondering if acceptance is, I know you're supposed to just let it go, no matter what happens, and just say, okay, I have faith in you, God, it's gonna all work out fine.
Well,
In any situation, Job's or anything in life particular?
there are no absolutes, merely. Sometimes God allows us to go through something, and to accept it, we sit down in the mud hole and look silly. Sometimes God wants us to build an ark. Sometimes we know that we're going through something right now that we don't understand. And acceptance, if you mean acceptance by being patient till God gives you wisdom and understandings about it, without giving up on your faith. What I'm understanding you to say is, my faith is going to accept it as it is until God changes it. Is that what you're saying?
Okay, pretty much.
That sounds good. Yeah, acceptance, like I said, there are no absolutes in the journey of faith. Sometimes we have to open our eyes to see, we have to open our ears to hear, because God is leading us. And for us, acceptance sometimes is giving up. And faith never gives up. So again, we do. But faith should not give up. Faith is that which, okay, I can't change what my circumstance is right now. Job could not change his suffering. He could not change the loss that he had financially. He was dead broke. He could not bring his children back because they were dead. So he couldn't change those things. So Job could have given up and said, Lord, there's not a thing I can do about it. It is what it is. And Job's not doing that. That's not acceptance. Acceptance is, God, I don't understand what you're doing, but I'm patiently going to wait for you to show me. That's acceptance.
Judy's a good example. For a week and a half now, she's been dealing with what turns out to be a kidney stone. And every day we've been praying that, looking to God for answers, that He's going to show us the way to go. And one step at a time, He provided this and this and this, and now we're waiting on the doctor to call back. And just being thankful that she's been able to, through medicine and everything, to hang on.
That's exactly, again, there's a better day coming. That's what faith is. All things work to the good for them that love the Lord and are called according to His purpose. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not yet seen. So that's what Job is saying. He's not giving up. If you accept it and just give up, you're sitting in a mud hole and you look foolish in it. But if you're going through a trial and a tribulation, you say, I can't change the circumstances, but I'm waiting to see what God's going to do, and I'm making myself available. That's what you call faithful acceptance.
And that's what Job is doing. Gotcha.
I'm sorry, Miss Carol?
But Job did for a while. He got very depressed and started saying, well, take my life and, just take me out of this misery. So he did give up before he came around the
Right. And again, faith has its ups and downs. Again, and you'll see it through Job's journey of faith. It has its ups and downs. Some days you go through there and you say, God, I just wish I could just go on to heaven. And then other days you say, I wish I'd never been born. And other days you say, well, you know, it looks better today. Again, up and down. Again, that's the human element about faith. Okay? And that's the thing about the human element. Job is showing us the human element of faith in that journey that we take. Believing in God, not knowing, not understanding, but accepting that God knows what he's doing. And that's what Job is saying in these verses. He's got the whole world in his hands. Okay? Anybody else? Okay, we're done.